I'm from Digital Signage Explored, and today with me we have Ivo, who is Director of Product for Nexmosphere. Ivo, thank you very much for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I was shocked actually when we started looking at this and that you hadn't been on the show yet as we're up to episode 20, and it would have made way more sense to have you in earlier on. So I apologize for that, but we've got some really good points to talk about with Nexmosphere and how you kind of work with the digital signage industry. Could you give a brief kind of elevator pitch of Nexmosphere?
Sure. So with Nexmosphere, we have a sensor platform specifically designed for digital signage. So the idea is that you connect our platform to a digital signage player on the screen to make content interactive instead of static.
Mhm.
It's one platform with over 25 different sensors. So there's a whole range of applications, interactive applications you can create with our.
Okay. So and that's really interesting because I think it's something we need to delve into a little bit more to understand the use cases of the product, because I know Nexmosphere, an entity, has so many different facets of the different types of triggers and sensors and motion and all those kinds of things. Is there a particular customer that you're serving for? Is there someone that, a use case that is traditionally being asked for? Or is it a big spectrum of different requirements?
So we definitely position ourselves as the sensor platform for digital signage. But if you look to where interactivity in digital signage makes most sense, there are definitely some specific use cases and some specific verticals as
Hmm.
well. By far, the most important one is retail, um, specifically because there's also scale
Yeah.
there. But I think also if you look to museums, exhibition centers, experience centers, a lot of companies with those
Mm.
now. It's all about giving people, customers, a reason to visit a public
Yeah.
venue. And by adding interactivity to digital signage, it's one of the things how you can do that basically.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, and actually we've had a couple of different conversations in kind of in other guises, but specifically around retail is that struggle with trying to create engagement from a brick and mortar experience where digital is the competing option right now. So do I go onto my Amazon cart and hit purchase, or am I going there to engage, interact, or learn, or come away with something a little bit of more value than just the product in itself? Do you feel like that's from the customers that you're speaking to? Is that the pain point that they're feeling? Is that what they're trying to solve for?
Amongst others. So yeah, I think definitely if you look to retail, for sure, one of the things is that you want to create an engaging
Mm.
experience to facilitate a connection between the customers and a brand and a
Mhm.
product. A specific example for that is a very typical example as well, lift and learn
Right.
applications, where a customer picks up a product and immediately on the screen, information or a brand video about that product is being shown.
Mhm.
So this is one of those things where you say, okay, well, you could also just have looped through the different product videos, but you're never really sure if the customer sees the video of the product where the customer is interested.
Right.
So a lot of it is, if we take it one level higher, a lot about adding sensors and interactivity is about increasing the impact of the
Right.
content, playing the right content at the right time.
Mhm.
I was going to say, if you look to digital
Mm.
signage, I think there are a few benefits we can all agree on. One is that you can play moving content, but the second one is you can, switch the content.
Mhm.
And for a long time, that has been either scheduled changes or programmatic changes. But by adding sensors, you can literally change content on the fly based on what is happening in the surroundings of your screen,
Yeah.
making it so much more effective.
Yeah, and we should be clear on that kind of use case. Is like, as an example, if you're a big shoe company and you've got a whole wall of shoes there, you want to kind of put them in their best light possible. So you might want a solution where a person could pick up that shoe, it registers that shoe is missing from its pod or its point, and then a screen nearby or next to the shoe would give you more information as selling points and add value to that. And obviously, if you've got a whole wall of 25 shoes, to have those in rotation means that it would take half an hour or so for those videos to play through, and the likelihood of the customer looking for that product is never going to get the upsell or the USP on that product in time. Is that kind of a good example of where that would be used?
Exactly 100%. And I think also it's actually a very good example. We see that in footwear, it's being applied a
Mm.
lot. It's also a category which is kind of spec heavy. So, and this goes back to your initial question in terms of retail, if you look to online versus brick and mortar,
Mm,
right? Online people are used to basically select a few
mhm.
parameters, the things they are looking for, and maybe 5 or 6 shoes remain on the screen, and it's very easy to
Yeah.
choose. If you're in a physical store, you have maybe 70 really shoes in front of you. By also adding these interactive elements, helping people to select what they are looking for, helping people to explain when they either lift the shoe or place the shoe somewhere, focusing on the specifications of that shoe, it really helps them to actually find what they are looking for, what they are also used to doing when they're shopping online.
And I did want to highlight one of your products actually when you're talking about that, because you sent out a demonstration video, which hopefully I'll splice in here as we're talking about it, where you had like an LED strip, but you had this concept of an LED strip that would point you to the direction of product that someone was searching for by kind of like a light show, in essence, like a LED strip that just goes this way to product X or product Y, almost like a tour guide to some extent. So that's another a use case. Have you seen that come up much, or is that more of a proof of concept stage, or where is that in the product line?
And so actually, I have to say, to my own surprise, it hasn't been applied yet that
Mm,
much, but the real life applications we've seen for it are really, really cool in my
yeah.
opinion. So one of the projects we've seen being done by our integrators was in Belgium in a really big wine store.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, not actually just a wine store, but all sorts of liquor like beer or whatever. So what they did, they have this big touch screen at the beginning of the aisle, and you can give all sorts of preference, like, what are you eating that night? What grapes do you like? What countries do you for and why? And as you select all those different inputs, on the shelves, lights go on with the wines
Oh, that's
matching your
cool.
input.
Like a
Yeah, we
visual
actually have a
filter.
video of that as well. I can share it with you, but it's a really, really cool application.
So it's almost like you're almost like doing like a visual filter to what you've got physically in front of you. Hey, you like these grapes? So these bottles aren't really relevant to you. Let's turn the lights off around those, and it's like boiling it down to just the selected products that you're after.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
cool.
And I think one of the things we also see happening more and more is that you actually combine those two. So when you pick up a product, other products light up as well,
Mm.
which can, for example, be matching accessories or be something like, oh, if you like this product, you also might be interested in those
Hmm.
products, right? So all those mechanisms which you see being used online in different forms could also be applied in brick and mortar
Mm.
retail by the use of sensors and
So talking about other industries, 'cause I know retail is a huge one for you guys. Is there
yeah.
any other kind of secondary industry that often gets touched on with this that comes up in discussion? Obviously, you mentioned things like museums, etc. Is that the next one on the list?
Yeah, I would say, I think if I look to the second category, typically tend to combine museums and experience centers because typically what you want to do there is tell a story,
Mm.
right? I mean, that for sure also goes for retail, but maybe even more so for museums. That definitely is the second application vertical we see. It's really exciting to work on those projects because in terms of interactivity and creativity, it really goes beyond a single touch point in terms of how the interactivity works. Typically, it's really journey which is being created with multiple sensors, multiple ways of interacting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think those are the two that spring to mind. I think there's definitely some corporate scenarios we could talk about. We actually have a customer that's reviewing right now. I can't say who the customer name is. They're reviewing using the Nexmosphere buttons as a way for staff to interact with the screen to exchange what is pretty freely available content to more sensitive content. So the staff only have access to be able to push this button. They push this button, and all of their data turns up on the screens to look at sales
Right.
reports. I think there's lots of unique ways of looking at this. It's just a way of, I mean, digital signage now, if we look at where it was in its infancy, the biggest selling point was look at your poster and now look at it with motion. That's what you can do. And you can
Yeah.
upload that remotely. And that's been the conversation for 10, 15 years now. I think this next iteration that I wouldn't say it's in its infancy, it's pretty well established, but the next step on that is to look at engagement and to look at how do we take what is in essence kind of our moving poster into one that allows us to have 5 or 6 different versions of content ready to go at a time. And it becomes more of an education tool or an engagement tool than it is just kind of just static. Well, static is the wrong word, but just, more motion.
100%. And you were right. It's still, so in the past years, it sort of moved from being this niche thing, which some companies or projects would do for
Hmm.
flagship stores or special museums. But we see that it really has become a core consideration also in major projects. Just to give an example, one of the things we see being applied a lot, like the most by far, is presence sensing.
Right.
See if a person is in front of your display. And that sort of comes back to your point where you say, okay, well, we can change the content on the screen. So let's think about how we can make it, you know, most effective, how we can utilize the fact that it's digital in the best way possible. Think, for example, of a self-ordering kiosk in a restaurant, right? It doesn't really make sense to show all these little buttons and little text if nobody is in front of the screen.
Right.
It makes much more sense to give a big brand message with a call to action, and then only when someone steps in front of the screen, then switch to the touch menu.
Yeah.
So this is a really small example by how only adding one sensor, you already drastically increase the impact, and thereby, in my opinion, also the value, the total installation, and the return on investment.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I do almost want to avoid going into all of the sensors that Nexmosphere has. And if you want to go and investigate Nexmosphere further, you can go to Nexmosphere. Is it nexmosphere.com? I'm assuming you can go over,
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
have a look through. There's tons and tons of different sensors, and it's almost difficult to package into one summary all of the different ways you can engage. But it is about a return on investment. And if you're looking at digital signage right now from any industry, I don't think retail is the major one, but there are others. It's if I've got a cost for a screen and a device and my CMS, which is kind of the three core pieces that you need. If I invest a little bit more and have an interactive capability, how much more am I going to get out of that solution? How much more value am I going to pull? How much more engagement can we have? And I think a lot of the times the people making these decisions are kind of having high level board discussions about why we did something and what the return was. There's a lot more that you can do from an integration perspective when you have a sensor tool available to you, whether that be touch or motion or, kind of presence, as you mentioned, Ivo. Is that kind of the conversations you're having with individuals that are looking at Nexmosphere for the first time?
Yeah, I think what we focus on with customers who are looking to us for the first time is to start really with these core applications, right? Presence sensing, lift and learn, or easy interactions,
Mm,
just so that they understand the platform and they understand how interactivity can add value. And from there on, we try to go to more complex setups. One of the things which also really helps, at least looking towards Nexmosphere, is that we have these ready-to-use showroom kits and
mhm.
demo kits, which people can use to really demonstrate interactivity without first having to dive into the platform and select sensors and things like that. So we try to approach it from an application perspective and not too much from a technical
Yeah.
sensor perspective.
We've got one running just over there. So I'll go record a bit after this and I'll splice it in here so you can see what we're talking about.
Perfect. And coming back to those initial conversations and verifying investments, quite a newer topic we are seeing, which is brought up a lot, is data analytics.
Right.
Right? If you have sensors, one of the things you can do besides triggering is also actually capturing that data.
Hmm.
This is really an interesting new area. If you utilize that data in a smart way and convert it into meaningful information and hopefully knowledge, one of the things you can do is actually offer the end customer a business intelligence tool in which you can see how many people have walked by, how many people have
Hmm.
stopped, how many people have picked up this product.
Mm.
In terms of optimization, you could do A/B testing, right? So we have content A running, we have content B running. If we compare those two, which content draws the most attention,
Mm.
to which content people stop for the longest. So that's also a really interesting new area for which we also have some great partners such as SenseMe and yourself. But for me, that's a really exciting new part actually of adding sensors to digital.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's so much the zeitgeist of the conversations that are going on right now is all about that kind of data analytical side of it. I think digital signage, and I've said this several times on this show before, but it is, I see the route to digital signage will eventually be like a physical version of YouTube. Like you'll have all the measurements, the analytics, and you'll understand and you'll be able to buy ad space if you're in digital out of home or whatever it might be, but you'll have so much more insight into your user base that you don't have right now with digital signage. And, if you make YouTube videos, you can get a pretty good understanding of your age demographic, where people fell off on content, how effective the content was, and with this ability to do A/B testing, there's another company called Blue Zoo that do like a
Yeah.
very simple, basic phone sensor that just goes, all right, there was X amount of people within this area that stayed for longer than 2 minutes for a period of time. Pairing something like your data with their data suddenly gives you a really powerful overview of A/B testing content which you couldn't do before. You say that, well, this screen, maybe it didn't perform as effectively as this screen did, but actually the problem isn't within the content. We can see we've got less footfall over here. And suddenly you can start making really clever business decisions on your digital signage without breaking the bank and be without kind of having to reinvent the wheel. Like it's all out there. It's just pairing that data together.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's also the nice thing about these ecosystems we see a lot in the digital signage industry. If you have these platforms which indeed can consolidate data, whether it is from Nexmosphere or from Bluezoo, I think there are many others, combining that data, I wouldn't say the more sensors you add, the better the data gets,
No.
but if you cleverly add different sensors, which to your example adds different layers to which you can correlate the data, then it becomes really, really interesting and really powerful.
Yeah. And I think there is spending a lot of time in marketing, there's a lot of data that you can very easily get data blind, where there's so many data points where you
Yeah.
go, which metric am I following here? Like this one's got a higher CTA, but this one's got a lower this, and it's irrelevant to some extent. You've got to have to go, here are my key performance indicators, whether it be, how many Nexmosphere interactions was there at a pod. And if one is performing worse than the other, that's your KPI. As long as one number is consistently going up, you know that you're making progress on what your initial plan was. And I think people can overcomplicate that sometimes, but you actually just go without that information, without having an interactive element, you've lost, well, first of all, you've lost return on investment because you're not delivering as much content that's as effective for the user. You're losing a little bit of the engagement because it's not as experiential, which is a big trigger word for retail at the moment, kind of that experience that people come away with. And also you're missing out on the opportunity to A/B test your content to improve it as you go forward.
And the interactivity. Coming back, for example, to a shoe wall with 80 shoes. Well, one of our integrated partners in Germany recently actually created a place alert application in a big store, I think for more than 300 shoes.
Wow.
And so as you can imagine, building separate digital signage content for 300 shoes really wasn't an option. So instead what they did, they made sure that all the content which is in their database for their website is rendered in a digital signage friendly way in their in-store screens.
Right.
So I think that's also a great example of how you should try to think in a very broad sense in terms of your business of how you want to utilize your digital signage and how that interacts with other aspects.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That ties into the episode that just released on Plainly, where they were kind of talking about this content at scale. When we're talking about this trigger content, the knock-on effect downside to that is you need more content. So being able to do that at scale is also really important, but it's all coming together. I think the industry right now has a lot of options that are viable, that can work together to create that entire solution. I think it'd be great one day to sit down and do like a retail roundtable where we just take an imaginary customer and just take them through that entire experience from beginning to end. This is like, I've got product X, here's the issues, how do we solve it? And just literally, we have you guys in from an interactive perspective, and then maybe we have as I mentioned, like the Blue Zoo guys in, and we have Plainly. Almost you can just put together that entire story to make a full solution for someone that would make a lot of sense. I will reach out to you after this because I really like that idea. Perfect. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, Ivo, in terms of kind of functionality and how do you see this moving forward in the future? Is this something that is just collectively just generating more steam? Is it still pretty niche to certain use cases? Do you see this kind of becoming more accepted mainstream?
Yes, definitely. And obviously, in this case, I can only look to what I see happening in the world, but also to look at Nexmosphere directly. I think about 2 or 3 years ago, we saw a really significant change in the type of projects in which sensors and interactivity were considered for. Not just the increased scale, but also how it ties together with all the core considerations in the product. Like, what do you want to achieve? What's the goal? I think one of the trends we're seeing now, looking forward for the next few years, is also standardization. I remember when we started, I think Signage Live actually was one of the first who connected with Nexmosphere. But I think if you look to ecosystems in general in digital signage, and not just hardware, but also software and also the analytics, it's all consolidating into this ecosystem, which makes it increasingly, well, easy to make content interactive and create interactive digital experiences. So that's a really important part that where used to be that, okay, if you want to do interactivity, it's going to be custom hardware and custom code and basically a lot of head worry. This sort of transition from, well, you can use all these really user-friendly software packages, easy to use hardware, almost plug and play. So where the technology and how the technology was packaged used to be a limitation. Moving forward, we see that it's the sort of creativity is the driving factor and not the available technology.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. Obviously, I always don't want to mention it, but you can't go through this episode without mentioning AI, I guess. It's a big thing for us we're thinking about as well, meaning that one of the things which AI has in common is that all types of AI is that it needs input.
Yeah.
Right. It needs data. So one of the things we're thinking about as well is what that means, for example, Nexmosphere, but maybe also sensors in general, like what role can that play in digital signage if you're going to use AI and already also have sensors to provide it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, we could end up in a world where you lift the sensor and based on some other parameters, the content that turns up on the screen is completely generated at that very moment. It's not even pre-considered. It's just, input-based content.
Yeah. And I think when people talk about AI, the first things they think about is completely 100% generated videos or pieces of audio. But I think it can work out to be much more subtle, right? If we talk about A/B testing, I think it would very likely be possible that with AI, tweaking small parts of the content, critical parts, could serve automated AI testing. And I can see, well, if we price it $27.89 instead of $27.91, we see that there's a 2% increase in engagement, for example.
Yeah, that would be really fascinating. You just blow my mind there. There's so many different outputs in that because you could basically have a creative department that bring up, here's our stock image number one. And when you throw it into the AI machine, it just comes up with, all right, well, what if they weren't smiling? What if it was a more neutral look? What if they had, like all this stuff that you just slight tweaks and changes, which I know, kind of really in-depth collateral marketing is all about. And then to have that, like you've got 6 sensors set up and as they interact, you're just logging that data. And eventually there's some AI tool in the cloud that goes, all right, well, this one's the winner. We're going to replace it with this and start a new A/B test on that one.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think it's definitely a bit out there in the future.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, I think, a way we are heading.
100%. Perfect. Ivo, really appreciate you coming on the call. I'd love to have you on again in the future on this kind of retail roundtable. I'm definitely going to start working on that one. But where can people find you?
So we do lots of different shows throughout the year. So on our website, you can find where you can find us. We're on LinkedIn. If you want to see us in action, that's a good place to go. I would say in most beauty stores, tech stores, where you can see something interactive happening when you pick up a product. Most likely it's with Nexmosphere technology also.
Perfect. Excellent. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Signage Live and what we do here, you can come find us at signagelive.com. There is a section under there called Learn and Explore if you want to follow along with more of these episodes. Obviously, you can find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and all other good places. If you do want to subscribe, we're trying to make a community of individuals that can add knowledge and help you in your discovery of digital signage for the first time. Again, thank you, Ivo, so much for coming on the call, and hopefully we'll see you again on the next one.
Thank you. I'm in for the next one.
Okay, thanks very much.